Hey guys, I'm Amy and it's bracket time. Have you ever wanted to put on a tournament and you don't know how to do the brackets? Well, we're going to take a look. This is mainly for a Rockport Baptist Church family camp, but if you're joining in with us, we're glad to have you. It's easy when there's two teams. You play each other, you play one game and you have a champion. It's easy when there's four teams. You play the first two games with 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Then you have a game 3 and a champion. There's a pattern already developing here. If there's two teams, you play one game. If there's 4 teams, you play 3 games. So if there's 8 teams, you're going to play, you got it, 7 games. That's easy. That continues. If you had 32 teams, you would have 31 games. If you have 64 teams like the tournament for the NCAA, you would have 63 games. But what happens when you move away from the exponents of 2? There is a pattern. 2 to the first is 2, 2 to the second is 4, and so on down to 64. Those set up perfect brackets. You can just play all the way in, and you never have to have byes, and you never have to have play-ins. Easy as that. So if 4 teams have 3 games, and 3 teams have 2 games, let's take a look if we just have, well, I just said it, 3 teams. The Cardinals would have the bye. The Cubs and the Reds would play, and then the Cardinals would play the winner of the Cubs and the Reds, and we never let the Cubs win, so it would be the Reds, and then the Cardinals win the whole thing, and we have 2 games total. So once again, even when you have an odd number of teams, it works the same pattern mathematically. So how do you decide whether to have a bye or a play-in game? Let's say there's 13 teams. First, you've got to determine the powers of 2 below and above 13. Well, below is 8. 8 would be a perfect tournament bracket. And above is 16. It would be a perfect tournament bracket. Then you determine the midpoint, which in this case is 12. 12 is halfway between 8 and 16. If the number of teams is above the midpoint, you'll use byes. In this case, you'll use a 16-team bracket, and 3 teams will receive byes. 16 minus the 13 is 3, is how you determine that. So we have a 13-team tournament, and we see 1, 2, 3 byes, and then it plays into a total of 12 games where, yes, the Cardinals do win again. Notice, too, that if you're setting up brackets, it's a lot easier to put them on opposite sides of each other to play in. It makes for a better view of the whole tournament. So again, bye or a play-in. What if there's 10 teams? Again, the powers of 2 above and below, and you get the midpoint of 12. And this says above and below 13, but we're dealing with 10 this time. Ignore that. Since the number of teams is less than the midpoint, you'll use a play-in game. In this case, you're going to have an 8-team bracket, and you'll have 2 play-in games. You take the 10 teams minus the 8-team bracket, and you end up with 2 play-in games. If the teams are not seeded, then the teams can be randomly placed in the brackets. And it'll look something like this. You have 8 and 9 playing in, 7 and 10 playing in, and then teams 1, 4, 5, 2, 3, and 6 are set up. This is seeded. We'll look at that here and again in a moment. So if you want a 10-team tournament to be perfectly seeded to a champion, then you're going to have to set it up like this. Ultimately, if you'll start with the second row, you want 1 and 8 to play each other, 4 and 5, 2 and 7, 3 and 6. Now, if I had an audience, I would ask them, what do those numbers all equal up to? 9. 1 more than the 8-team tournament. The 8 and 9 team and the 7 and 10 team will play in, and then you would play out to a perfect seed where the number 1 team won the championship. It never really seeds perfectly, but that's kind of what it would look like. You want to make sure that your play-in teams are your lower seeds, and you want the 8 and 9 to play into the 1 and the 7 and the 10 to play into the 2. If you had 16 teams and you wanted to perfectly seed it, it would come out this way. If you look in the first round, the teams add up 1 and 16 to 17. In the second round, they add up to 9. In the third round to 5, and then you get your champion. If they don't add up like that when you're seeding, you've got a couple of teams out of place, so be sure to watch for that. But what about double elimination? Let's look at an 8-team double elimination tournament. You would begin just like you would with a winner's bracket on one side, but you're going to need to not only assign the teams, but also the game numbers. So here would be the loser's bracket. Notice in the first round of the loser's bracket that the teams who lost in the winner's bracket in the first round play each other. And then they begin to play the teams from the other bracket. If you look, 1 and 2 lost, so they're going to play, the losers of 1 and 2, they're going to play the loser of game 6. And then you bracket game 5 to play the loser of 3 and 4. Then they play each other again in the loser's bracket. That pattern continues no matter how many teams you're having in your tournament. Loser's bracket setup is explained again here with 1 and 2, 3 and 4, playing into 6, playing into 5, and then they play each other, and then they play into the loser of a winner's bracket again. Just keep that pattern going. Now, if there's less than 8 teams, let's say 7, you're going to give a bye. At the bottom left-hand corner, you see a bye for team 7, and that bye just transfers over to the loser's bracket. The bye always loses, and then loser 3 plays in again. If you had a 10-team double elimination, you would set the winner's bracket up just like you did for the winner's bracket earlier, but you would have the play-in of 1 and 6 and 2 and 4. So over in the first part, you have a game 1, and let's say that team 8 lost game 1. You would move them to the loser's bracket, but they would not play the loser of the game 2. They would play the loser of game 6. You'd give them opposite ends of the bracket. And if you have a consolation bracket, which some people like to choose because they don't want to go to the trouble of having a double elimination, but they do want to give all their teams an opportunity to play more than one game, you simply take the champion to the right and the consolation to the left. And that way everyone gets at least 2 games. This would be how it would look if you had 5 teams. You'd have to draw the bracket up to the next power of 2, even if it's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 empty spaces, and then go on out from there. Finally, if you're wanting to seed your teams based upon a round robin or a pool play, you would set it up something like this. You would have 2 pools. The teams would all play each other. You see where 1 is playing 2, 3, and 4, then 2 is against 3, 2 against 4, and 3 against 4. You always put up the point differential. What was the difference between the winning team and the losing team? And then if there's a tie, that point differential breaks the tie. Otherwise, it's the team who wins the most games in your pool will play the team who won the most games in the other pool, or I'm sorry, the team that won the least games in the other pool, and you would seed it in your 8-team bracket. Hopefully this helps you set up, especially those of you setting up for family camp. See you next week.